Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So actually, yesterday night I've said something, but I didn't. It wasn't uploaded to YouTube. So it's just a very short kind of like observation. But I think that for documentation purposes, maybe I should repeat it and now upload it properly to YouTube. So the observation is regarding the historical connection between the tea catastrophes or the tea apocalypses and the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Because one of the defining characteristics of this conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that as everybody understand and probably understood since the first days of the conflict, of what they call the חרבות ברזל, like iron sword, and I said, by the way, it's so stupid. Whoever thought about this name, I know many times it's just computers that, generate the names, so maybe we shouldn't put too much effort in interpreting the names of the operations, because famously it's done by either a computer or a person that is not very different from a computer. But swords are not made of iron, because it's not. Swords are made of metal, not iron. It's actually very stupid to create swords from iron. And it was known 3,000 years ago. If you construct swords from iron, it will be both heavy as shit and also, not practical at all. Anyway, maybe it's kind of like, maybe it's actually a good, unintentionally, it's kind of a good metaphor for the Israeli IDF, that it's kind of like, it's too heavy and cannot be used because, and it's easily breakable, like iron, purely iron swords. Anyway, so the one of the defining characteristics was indeed the fact that, and this was actually documented in this channel, partly metaphorically, but partly just like that, in plain words. And I think, in the days before the conflict started, and also in the first couple of days, I had even several comments from unusual comments, actual comments, not comments in the usual channels of intelligence, but YouTube comments, people actually told me what the fuck you speak about all sorts of imaginary wars where there is a war going on right now. But so it's not imaginary if it's going on right now. It's the simple answer. If it's going on right now, then it's not imaginary. But I've said it very clearly. That one of the effects of the tea apocalypses is the fact that the Shabak is getting considerably weaker. By the way, not for only one reason. There are several reasons. Because there is the short-term reason, there is the short-term effect, there is medium-term and long-term effect. But in any case, all the effects, makes the grip of the Shabak over the Palestinian population much, much weaker. Of course, that's their main objective. Besides for making my life hell, which sometimes seem to be their true main objective, above all other things, or the egoistic objective of generating money to themselves, which is probably, I would say, the meta objective, something that is hovers above all other objectives, is kind of the super objectives of getting more money. But from in security purposes, and of course in certainly in the declarative level, their main and certainly in the way of how how the Shabak is perceived by the public. Certainly the main objective is the control over the Palestinian population. It's known to be such. So they don't. It's not like the FBI that or other internal services that they have crime law enforcement capacity. On the contrary, they are known to be the generators of crime, not of or to solve crimes. The Shabak do not help the police or like solve crime. They generate more crime. I mean, again, I don't know how. Actually, I don't even know. Like, I mean, how I as I said many times, the world of intelligence was not really something that ever interested me. I mean, it was a minor. I mean, I served in the intelligence corps, but in a technological capacity. I wasn't directly involved in intelligence, never in my life, and it wasn't something that was very important to me. I mean, I was drawn into it because I was forced to be part of this world, because I mean, people treat me as like as a target all my life, and it's getting only worse with time. And so I'm forced to be part of it. I mean, but I never chosen to be part of it, and certainly I've never received like a shekel. Only people get steal things from me. So I don't know. I don't even know what's the standard about it, like in other places. Of course, in prima facie totalitarian like states, like I mean the like the famously the Soviet Empire, but other states as well. So I mean there are no really boundaries. Like I mean the KGB can do everything, including of course solving crimes or generating crimes or whatever they wanted. But in supposedly democratic states, I don't even know what's the standard. I mean famously the FBI, that I mean what they do both, like traditional internals, like things, like I mean like intelligence things, like catching spies and ensuring like that ensuring, I mean, that there will be no dangerous political uprisings, things like that. But they also, I mean, famously solve crimes because I mean you see it in some. I mean you can watch it in so many movies that I mean even if it's partly fictional, I mean it cannot be completely fictional. I mean, so they do it as well. There is like it's like a federal it's a federal agency that deals with crimes in the federal level. By the way, famously not the first one. Actually, the marshals, if I'm not mistaken, I mean preceded them by many decades actually. But not the marshals. What's all the names? Like I mean, like from Justified. I really like Justified. There is now like a revival of Justified. I haven't watched it. Was it already broadcasted? I really like the series. Like I mean, it's not that highly, it's kind of it's resisting the lower levels of the culture, I would say. But it was a guilty pleasure for me. I've watched all six seasons. Like I've watched all of that. Justified. So what was like what's the name of this agency? The Marshals or the whatever? Anyway, so they solve crime. I mean the FBI, but in Israel the Shabak do not solve crimes. They only generate more crime. So what they do, I mean on like I mean the objective is the control over the Palestinian people. First, I mean until '67, I mean it was mainly the Palestinians. I mean those that were considered Palestinians, that were actually Arabian citizens inside of Israel, that were, I mean, considered, I mean, second class and treated as perpetual enemies. But after '67, actually, it was a little bit changed. I mean, because I mean, gradually, I mean, the situation of the Arabian Israelis, I mean, inside of Israel was actually elevated. Sometimes, very prominently so. I mean, this depended on how much they were willing to cooperate with the Israeli establishment, and as opposed to what you can maybe watch in television or news. Actually, almost all of them completely cooperated with the Israelis. I mean, that's why I've said it many times. I mean, there is no forgiveness for the Arab population inside of Israel because they are part of Israel, almost completely so. I mean, their moral situation is a little bit higher than that of the Jews, but not in a way that will not justify the complete destruction of Israel, including the Arabs of Israel. And actually, and I've spoken about it quite a bit in my journeys, like before this channel was created, like I mean in the Twitter and Evernote account, and doing my journeys in Israel. Like actually, I've said several good things about it. So I've traveled a lot in Israel, and like I've documented all of my thought and or including, I mean, also including, like, I mean, in of course, like Arab, like, what they call kfarim, which is actually, it's actually, I mean, translated as villages, but actually it's like the cities, in the Arab cities, and also, in the Golan, like, the Druze. I mean, the bottom line is that yes, I mean, the ethical situation is a little bit higher than that of the Jews, but it's also in the gutters, because they're all part of the, I mean, okay, Satan has got its grip over the state, I mean, and everybody that is in it, I mean, included. So mostly they decided to cooperate with the Israelis completely, and they still do, and they are part of this Nazi state. But I mean, on the other hand, there was now the huge Palestinian population that was subjected to the Israelis, and it's still the situation more than ever. And so now it became like the main, like, target of the Shabak. So when there was so one of the things that happened now is that, and it was documented online in this channel, is that because of the kind of like the tea crisis that has several, I mean, effects. I mean, several kind of, I mean, manifestations, but its immediate effect on the operational level is that they lose control over the Palestinians, and then, I mean, so they had like and it's not by chance that, I mean, that you've seen this great initiative, and it's not only the initiative that the Palestinians had, like, in this conflict. It's much more than the initiative, because you see that, I mean, it's like more than a month now, and still the Israelis cannot show the population of Israel what is the real, I mean, objective of the Israelis in this operation. I mean, they're not going to kill all million or so, like, Arabs in Gaza streets, as many, like, fascist Nazi Israelis fantasize. So what is the true objective? I mean, the true objective is to show the Israeli public some kind of achievement that will justify, I mean, like a ceasefire. Because they vehemently resist ceasefire right now, because the politician cannot, like, present any kind of, I mean, the opposite situation will still be terrible, and will affect Israeli politics tremendously. And I mean, the Israelis, I mean, they are still bloodthirsty. I mean, even though presumably 10,000 people died, but I mean, it's not enough. And so they try to kind of, like, I mean, to continue the operation until there will be some kind of achievement they can present to the voter. I mean, it's something that will, I mean, justify a ceasefire. But I mean, I don't even know theoretically what kind of objective this can be. So I mean, and it should be said, wars in Israel are, and I've spoken about it quite a bit, are always very short. They are common and short. I mean, I mean, there is one exception, which was the Independence War, which was like a year and a half. But I mean, it was very different from any other conflict, because these were different times, and it was, I mean, it was something like, technologically, it was like the Boer Wars, like at the end of the 19th century. It was very extremely non-technological, like the technology, I mean, greatly advanced in the decade after that. After 48, the technology was tremendously more, I mean, advanced in both sides, like both in the Arabian states and in Israel. In the 1940s, technology was, I mean, certainly with regard to anything related to the military, was extremely backwarded, both inside of Israel and or the territories that later became Israel, and of course the Palestinians inside of Israel that were part of the war, and the adjacent states. I mean, they were extremely technologically backward, and then in the next decade after that, the 1950s, there was amazing, like, I mean, technological jump in both sizes. So I mean, it's very, very the War of Independence is completely different from than the other wars, even though it didn't happen like in completely different time. It's like, I mean, it's just the 40s and the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. It's all, I mean, continuous. But I mean, there was so much, it was such backward technologically that, I mean, it's difficult to speak about it, like, in the same term, or to kind of judge it, I mean, to evaluate it in the same terms that we evaluate other wars or conflicts of Israel. Because they had such, I mean, they were so backward. I mean, everybody, all sides, like every participant. So wars are short, and you see that this is already becoming the longest war in Israel, in the history of Israel. So, and for what purpose? Nobody really knows. But I mean, much of it, all of that is directly related to the tea crisis because they lose control over the Palestinian authorities and they had the initiative and they after the first initiative they are still much in general in relative to what the usual situation they are much stronger than you can think because the might of the supposedly Israeli military, which is actually made out of like Nazis, is so much presupposed on the T. So they are much weaker than they actually, project. And as I've said, so there are the short term, the medium term, and the long term consequences. And the short term is, the literally what you call in the intelligence language loss of control. They cannot control them. And because of the bicycle mechanism, because of the trained bacteria, because of other, factors that are all related to the T. Now, in the medium terms and the long terms, it's even more devastating. And this is the kind of the nature of the observation that I wanted to point at. Actually, the same thing, but even to a much larger extent, already happened during the 1980s. Because, as I've said many times, there was a tea apocalypse during the 1980s. In Israel and also abroad. It happened during the 1980s. The beginning of the 80s, like the first half of the 80s. But the long-term effect was the destruction of the Shabak, the complete destruction of the Shabak, and also the Mossad, and also part of the KGB and the CIA, and also other parts of intelligence services all around the world, but I don't know to what extent. I just don't know. Certainly, the place that was devastated the most was Israel, because they were the main eaters of the tea, but during the time it was very common in the KGB and the CIA to also eat it, even to my estimation much more than today. So they were always they also were affected. But in Israel it was the most devastating. And the Shabak was annihilated. So, and thanks to the Americans, and thanks, quote unquote, thanks, but the Americans and the USSR, they decided to help Israel. And I speak about it in the video from a couple of months ago that I called the GOP party, GOP party. And maybe the adjacent videos that I don't remember their names, but it was all around the video that is titled the GOP party, GOP party. And so they decided to help Israel tremendously. And they revived Israel. Without the support of the USSR and the United States during the 80s, the middle of the 80s and the late 80s, Israel would have been collapsed. And that's, what it should have happened, but it didn't. What happened is that, they only became stronger because of this help, because of this unfortunate help. And so the Shabak was kind of revived, and the Mossad was also revived, but now under the control of the Americans. And it's like that since then, that actually the Mossad is, I would call semi-Israeli, semi-American body. And this contributes tremendously to the hostility between the Shabak and the Mossad. Hostility that, exists anyway, because it's traditionally like that in many countries all around the world, that the various intelligence agencies don't like each other, and even hate each other, of the same state. So the Shabak was revived, but it didn't happen in a day. You do understand that. It doesn't take a day to build an organization. Even if the organization is made out of crap and the scum of the earth, still takes some time to actually get the people and give them some. Even if the training that you give them is mostly hypnotic hocus pocus, and abracadabra, and hocus pocus billy bocus, focus, heart, focus. Even if this is most of the training that you do to give them, it still takes some time to kind of to transform this junk from pedophile lamp of barely human, pieces of meat to something that can actually, at least impersonate humans for a while, and utter some kind of words and do all sorts of I don't know, actions like that or whatever. Heart, focus. Even that, requires some kind of training, and that's like 90% of what they do, certainly in the field level. Heart, focus, heart. Even that required some kind of training. So, it wasn't in a day that, that the Shabak was revived. And it's not a coincidence that on 1987, what was later called the Intifada broken. Started, not broken. And later it was renamed to be the first Intifada, of course. But originally it was called the Intifada, and this was major series of events and development in the history of Israel. And even I myself, in the Intifada was an uprising of the Palestinians against Israel, uprising of that was in unprecedented. That was first certainly in its magnitude. It was the first it never happened before in Israel, and also not only in the magnitude of the uprising, but also what was special about it was was that they actually the Palestinians actually started to speak to publicly and non-apologetically speak about sovereignty, independence, and getting rid of the Israelis. Not only get better conditions from the Israelis, but to actually be separated from them. This was never spoke. Not never, but until that time, the only people that spoke along these lines inside the Palestinian people were kind of people that were not in the mainstream. Maybe Yasser Arafat and all sorts of people that were kind of that were not considered part of the mainstream at all, even by Arabians, by Arabs, all over the world. They were considered bizarre figures until then. But starting at that point, they become not only Yasser Arafat, but other people. They become they became almost respectable, if not totally respectable. He received the Nobel Prize. I guess it's kind of respectable, even though the value of the Nobel Prize greatly devalued with time. But it's still, I think, considered I think that the Nobel Prize is considered somewhat respectable. I don't know. You tell me. Do humans still find it respectable, or this is completely lost any kind of value to you? At least in the past, it was thought to be somewhat respectable, the Nobel Prize, so we received it, and he became authority figure, and of course it affected the Israeli society tremendously so. And it affected, actually, I remember that from the first years of my life. It wasn't just something that started in 1987 and immediately terminated. It lasted several years, and it affected Israeli society. And it's one of the memories that I have from the early childhood, from the early years. The speech about, the discourse, the conversation about the Intifada. People spoke about it even in a way that, children, even young children, were affected by it. And maybe as a young child, maybe I was more perceptive than the average child of my age, probably. But yes, it affected even young children. Intifada, is kind of the main conflict of our time. And the main security problem, or fear generator of the time. The speech of the Intifada. And although I even remember that it was actually an Israeli computer game, there weren't many Israeli computer games. It was very, very, very rare. Several computer games, not many, actually were translated, to Hebrew. The text was translated to Hebrew in a manner that is extremely common, all over the world until today, but was never actually common in Israel. Almost all computer games of all types, were distributed in Israel in the English language, even though in other countries it's actually common to translate the text. So, but like a very small amount of games during the 1980s and 1990s actually translated to Hebrew, but even like much less than that, there were actually Israeli computer games. I mean, you know what? I mean, you know, a programmer, you know, any kind of a programmer can create any kind of game, even like, you know, in one day. I mean, you know, using QBasic or even COBOL. I mean, whatever computer language of the time. But I mean, of those that got traction, like, and was distributed, like, you know, copied, you know, pirated, I mean, in the Israeli way, you know, widely among the population of the children, there were very little amount of Israelis, maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 maximum, not more than that. And among them, a prominent one was actually called Intifada. I mean, just to tell you that, I mean, the only kind of like, I mean, thing, not only historical event, but any kind of like, I mean, motive that, I mean, was found to be, I mean, interesting and relevant enough for Israeli programmers to actually create a computer game during the 1980s and also in the early 90s. Almost the only the topic was the Intifada. So, and I really remember this game. I mean, it was kind of like, I mean, it was it belonged to the XT era. I mean, even not. I mean, it was actually workable even on the XT. You know, you didn't even need like an 80 for that. And yeah, I really remember that from the first years of my life. I mean, there was all sorts of like, you know, kind of like, I mean, you know, pixels that represented you know, like stone throwers and like, you know, Molotov battle throwers, and you had like, I mean, like a police force, and you needed to. But it was kind of like a humane game that, I mean, that you couldn't like use like I mean, guns. I mean, you needed like, I mean, to use like, I mean, sometimes it's guns, but sometimes like lesser measures, and it was like, I mean, dictated by, I mean, by presumably who was the chief of staff. Like, I mean, there was certain levels like in the game, and the levels were represented by who is the chief, like Ramatkal, like, you know, who is the Ramatkal, like, is it like Ehud Barak, or I don't know who is the Ramatkal. Moshe Vachetzi, I don't know, all these Nazi figures. So, and then like each chief of staff, they had like their own agenda of what kind of weapons can be used, allowed to use against the population. Yeah, I mean, this is the only Israeli game that I remember from my childhood, and I played tremendous amount of computer games. Like, yeah, I mean, like you, wherever you are, I remember, you know, Commander Keen and Duke Nukem and, you know, the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Celtics, you know, in the kind of like, I mean, in the NBA, like, I mean, you know, final series, and of course, even earlier ones like Space Invaders. And also along that, I also remember Intifada, which was, I mean, a computer game that was in which you played the police force of your own country. I mean, hitting and killing, I mean, uprising people of your own country according to various laws that are dictated by, presumably, the changing chief of staff of the military, is like a way to change between levels of the game. Is this like, I mean, do you find it psychotic or Nazi? At the time, it was completely natural to me, but I mean, on a retrospective, it is bizarre. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, one of the things that you do as part of like a child of the 1980s is that you play Intifada in your XT or 80 or the 286 even, I guess. Yes, I mean, this is life. I mean, I guess this is life in Israel. And so, I mean, it was greatly, I mean, it was of great effect on Israeli society, and of course, these were the events, I mean, and the historical, I mean, development that led to the peace process that was completely fakaked, and nothing good, I mean, came out of it. But It was, of course, a dominant like trope during the 1990s, like the peace process. Before and after Rabin, I mean, people like to speak about it quite a bit. Anyway, all of that is directly related to the tea catastrophe that happened in the 1980s. So this observation will be all for now. Later today we will speak more about like more kind of like, I'll share a little bit more like, kind of like, personal evaluation of like how is it to be actually a tea eater, because since yesterday, it wasn't the first time that I've eaten the tea, because I told you like, about 2 months ago or something like that, I've eaten like, it was documented in the channel, I've eaten like 5 sandwiches with like a little bit of like, the tea jam, like in 5 consecutive days, like with various stuff, and actually 2 days it was also mixed with a little bit of stuff from the Full Metal Jacket mixture that contained a little bit of uranium, so it was actually uranium enriched tea, which is something that I don't know if you eat. I guess the humans do not, but maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. And it really adds an extra punch. But so maybe I'll speak about it some more. I do not find myself qualified to speak about it, like, because I've eaten it only 5 days, like 2 months ago, and like now, so maybe I need to wait a little bit before I speak about it more, but whatever. And also we will conduct yesterday I've started a new electrolysis experiment. That one. So we will take some microscopic examination, and we'll watch it under the microscope.